The War of 1812, often remembered as a lesser known chapter in U.S. history, was far more than just a conflict between two nations. It was a culmination of years of political, economic, and territorial tensions that had been building between the United States and Great Britain, fueled by competing interests and simmering hostilities. For the young United States, this war was a pivotal moment in asserting its sovereignty and establishing itself on the world stage. Britain, an empire stretched thin by years of war with France, often disregarded American interest in its pursuit of global dominance. The causes of this war were rooted in complex issues. These included British interference in American trade, territorial ambitions in North America, and an emerging sense of American pride and identity. Each of these factors fueled a growing resentment that would eventually ignite into war. This war wasn't only about trade or territorial disputes. For many Americans, it was a matter of national pride, honor, and sovereignty as they believed Britain was actively undermining their independence. At the heart of American grievances against Britain was the issue of British impressment. This was a policy by which British naval forces routinely stopped American ships, boarded them, and seized men they claimed were British deserters. To the British, impressment was essential to maintain their navy's strength during their prolonged war against Napoleon's France. Britain's need for sailors was immense, and they were willing to take drastic measures to keep their ships manned and ready for battle. The British insisted that many of the men they seized were indeed British subjects who had abandoned their duty, but among these were also naturalized American citizens who had left Britain and renounced their ties to the British crown. For Americans, impressment wasn't just about manpower, it was an affront to their national sovereignty. The practice was seen as a direct attack on their autonomy and independence, a humiliation for a nation striving to prove itself. Thousands of American sailors were taken from their ships and forced to serve in the British Navy. This practice caused outrage in the United States, where it was viewed as little more than sanctioned kidnapping by a foreign power. The Chesapeake Leopard Affair of 1807 was a particularly notorious incident that highlighted British aggression. When the British warship HMS Leopard fired upon American frigate USS Chesapeake, killing and wounding several American sailors, public opinion turned sharply against Britain. In response to these aggressions, President Thomas Jefferson implemented the Embargo Act of 1807. This law aimed to pressure both Britain and France to respect American neutrality by cutting off American trade with foreign nations. However, the Embargo Act proved disastrous for the American economy. American merchants, especially in New England, saw their businesses suffer tremendously as exports plummeted. In 1809, the Embargo Act was replaced by the Non-Intercourse Act, which allowed trade with all nations except Britain and France. While this allowed some recovery, it did little to ease the tensions that were now firmly established between the United States and Britain. Another major source of friction was Britain's restrictive trade policies. The Orders in Council, a series of decrees issued by the British government, were intended to prevent neutral countries from trading with France and its allies. These orders required American ships bound for Europe to stop first in British ports, where they would face inspection and have to pay fees. This policy was viewed by American merchants as a clear violation of their right to conduct free trade. The United States wanted to remain neutral in the Napoleonic Wars. However, Britain's trade policies effectively dragged them into the conflict, severely limiting their ability to trade freely. President James Madison attempted to navigate these challenges diplomatically. In 1810, he signed Makin's Bill No. 2, which reopened trade with both Britain and France, but promised to reinstate an embargo against the nation that continued to restrict American neutrality. Napoleon, seizing an opportunity to isolate Britain, claimed he would lift his trade restrictions. Madison responded by reimposing the embargo on Britain, a move that only served to escalate tensions further. In reality, Napoleon's promises were deceptive. French forces continued to seize American ships whenever it suited their interests, leaving Madison in a challenging position as he attempted to balance diplomacy and economic stability. Britain, seeing American policy as favoring their enemy, grew increasingly resentful. By 1812, British-American relations had deteriorated to a point of near hostility. Another significant factor in the build-up to war was British interference with Native American tribes in the Northwest Territory. Many native tribes in this region were determined to resist American encroachment on their lands, and Britain saw an opportunity to weaken the United States by supporting this resistance. The British still held forts in the Great Lakes region, where they supplied native tribes with weapons and other resources. This support allowed native tribes to resist American expansion more effectively. Tecumseh, a charismatic Shawnee leader, emerged as a central figure in the resistance. Alongside his brother Tenskwatawa, also known as the Prophet, Tecumseh sought to unite the tribes of the Northwest into a confederation that could stand up to American expansion. Tecumseh's vision was one of pan-tribal unity, a united front that could resist the American government's relentless push westward. He argued that native lands were held collectively by all tribes and that no single tribe had the right to sell the land to the United States. For American settlers, Tecumseh represented a direct threat to their expansionist ambitions. The idea of a powerful native confederation allied with British forces was a frightening prospect to many. In 1811, this tension came to a head at the Battle of Tippecanoe. William Henry Harrison, the governor of the Indiana Territory, led a force against Tecumseh's followers, attacking and destroying the native village of Prophetstown. Though Tecumseh was not present during the battle, the defeat weakened his confederation. Nonetheless, he would continue to play a significant role in the war, aligning with British forces as hostilities escalated. Many Americans saw British support for native resistance as yet another affront to their sovereignty. For those who were already angered by impressment and trade restrictions, this alliance was a final insult that made war seem inevitable. As tensions mounted, a powerful new faction emerged in the United States Congress, the Warhawks. This group of young, ambitious leaders believed that war was the only way to protect American honor and secure the nation's rights. Led by influential figures like Henry Clay of Kentucky and John C. Calhoun of South Carolina, the Warhawks argued that the United States could no longer tolerate British interference. They saw the war as an opportunity to defend American sovereignty and assert the nation's independence. The Warhawks were particularly incensed by British actions along the frontier. They believed that the war with Britain would not only put an end to impressment and trade restrictions, but also allow the United States to expand its territory. Many Warhawks held expansionist views and dreamed of annexing Canada and Spanish-held Florida. They saw these territories as natural extensions of the United States, rich lands that would ensure American dominance in North America. The Warhawks argued that British control of Canada posed a strategic threat. If America could seize Canada, it would not only eliminate a potential base of British operations, but also secure valuable land for American settlers. Despite the Warhawks' enthusiasm, not everyone in Congress was eager for conflict. New England Federalists were deeply opposed to the idea of war, as their economy was heavily dependent on trade with Britain, and they feared that the war would devastate their region's economy. In New England, opposition to the war was so strong that some Federalists even discussed secession. At the Hartford Convention, held in Hartford, Connecticut, they met to discuss ways to resist the federal government's policies. The political landscape in the United States was deeply divided during the 19th century. The Democratic-Republican Party, which dominated American politics at the time, was itself divided between factions that supported or opposed the war. President James Madison, a Democratic-Republican, was cautious about the idea of going to war. While he was aware of the grievances against Britain, he preferred a diplomatic solution and feared the potential consequences of a full-scale conflict. However, as pressure mounted, Madison began to recognize that avoiding war might no longer be an option. He faced increasing calls for action from the Warhawks and from the American public, who were growing impatient with Britain's repeated provocations. In the spring of 1812, Madison sent a war message to Congress. In this statement, he outlined the various grievances against Britain, from impressment of trade to their support of Native American resistance. Congress was deeply divided over the issue. Representatives from the southern and western states generally supported the war, while those from New England strongly opposed. Despite the fierce debate, the momentum of war proved unstoppable. On June 18, 1812, Congress voted to declare war on Great Britain, marking the first time the United States had formally declared war against another nation. This decision would shape the young nation's future in profound ways. The War of 1812 would test the resilience, unity, and determination of the United States, and it would mark a turning point in American history. This was a conflict more than just territorial disputes or economic grievances for the United States. It was more about securing a place on the world stage and proving that it would not be bullied or ignored. The war's origins are complex, and the motivations of those involved were diverse, but ultimately it was a fight for respect and recognition, a war for the right of a young nation to stand as an equal among the world's greatest powers.